Scenic Hotel Group, a place to stay no matter your staycation. From the Legacy Collection, Scenic Hotels, Suites and Resorts, and Heartland Hotels. Find your place to stay at scenichotelgroup.co.nz.
Sad news yesterday. One of the icons of the New Zealand horse racing and breeding industries, Sir Patrick Hogan, passed away at the age of 83. Sir Patrick was famous worldwide in the racing industry for the exploits of Cambridge Stud, the racing and breeding operation he started, which shaped the thoroughbred racing industry both here and across the Tasman. His fame reached such levels that he once had an audience with the Pope. And one of his proudest moments was when the late Queen Elizabeth II went to Cambridge Stud for a personal tour back in 1990.
I think she was hosting me. She picked the whole menu, which she did back at the palace, of course. And I didn't have to say, ma'am, would you like a drink? What would you like in it? She just said, yes, I'll have a gin and tonic. As much to say that I've already asked the question. The only thing that I don't regret, because it's not a regret, but I afterwards thought, I should have told the caterer, for God's sake, don't wash the cutlery and stuff. I want the lipstick on the gin and tonic.
That's the voice of the wonderful Sir Patrick Hogan. New Zealand Herald racing editor Michael Guerin is with us to reflect on the life of Sir Patrick. Michael, thanks for taking the time. Is it possible to put into context for us Sir Patrick's impact on the racing industry here?
Yeah, hi Jason. Big hi to your listeners here on a Saturday afternoon. It would not be exaggeration to say he's probably the most influential person in the history of New Zealand racing. Now, that's a long list, and there's a lot of people who, in the very early days, would have set up New Zealand racing, and obviously that has a spill-on effect. But Sir Patrick had an enormous effect in many, many ways. One of those was setting up Cambridge Stud. A stud is a farm where mares get served by stallions and produce foals. Now, those foals obviously go on to become racehorses who can win millions of dollars, can be sold for millions of dollars, but also, of course, can have breeding lifestyles or breeding careers worth up to hundreds of millions of dollars. Sir Patrick had two of the best of those. One of them was called Sir Tristram, who he bought out from England, who was a champion stallion and a horse who sired the winners of Melbourne Cups and Derbies and Oaks races. But then he doubled down and bought Sir Tristram's son, Zabeel, who went on to be perhaps even better sire in some ways. So his legacy roles in that capacity, we'll talk more about the human aspect shortly, Bonnie, but in that capacity, you're talking about hundreds of horses who have gone on to win thousands of races. Now, some of those horses are owned by mum and dad racehorse owners and syndicates. Some of those horses are owned by people who, basically own their own country. You're talking about sheikhs and those type of people. So you're talking about an enormous range of humans, predominantly across Australasia and the Pacific Rim and up to Asia, but also, of course, further afield, because bloodstock is an international business. So that is one aspect, and that aspect has an enormous flow-on effect, because once a mare is retired, she might have 10 foals, and technically they could have 10 foals. So some of these stallions he brought in, who could serve up to 140, 150 mares a year, they have thousands and thousands of progeny out there, grandsons, granddaughters, and that effect goes on and on and on. It's an enormous effect on the breeding industry. What's even more important is Sir Patrick Hogan was a perfectionist, a man who worked extremely hard. Like many racing people, Jason, he was a 7-day-a-weeker, and often up in the morning before, like most racing people, before dawn and working till when it got dark to hone his craft. Now, a lot of that comes from love of the horse, comes from wanting to be great at what they do, comes from economic pressures. But long after economic pressures had ceased for Sir Patrick, he still had that same work ethic. And that was infused in dozens of people who are still working in the industry at very high levels today. If you talk to almost any great stud master, by the people who run the studs or people who own the studs or full-time breeders in this country, many of them worked for Patrick Hogan. They went there to the Cambridge Stud environment. Some of them I've spoken to said, I asked my parents when I was 18, can I go work for Sir Patrick? Because I want to learn to be the best. And those people have taken over huge stud farms around New Zealand, around Australia, and further afield in Sir Patrick's land of heritage, you would say, Ireland. He wasn't born in Ireland, but he was from Irish descent. So when you take all those staff and all those people and the economic effect they have had and the effect they have had on the professionalism and the way that people have behaved in the culture of literally thousands of people, because again, you extrapolate those numbers out, he becomes very much the godfather of New Zealand racing and breeding, a man who set up a dynasty which goes way outside the Hogan family, but is almost viral in the way it has affected New Zealand racing and Australian racing, and viral in the most positive of senses. So you're talking about a man who, to the thoroughbred industry, was a member of the Ford family. Was a member of anybody who builds something which is going to outlast their lifetime. Those sort of famous people of the past, those entrepreneurs, those titans of industry. That's what Sir Patrick was. And yet, ironically, you mentioned he had times where he met with the Queen and he met with the Pope. He was also a person who a stable hand or a small-time owner could go up and discuss horses with, and he would always take time to talk to those people. I think in the modern world, those people are becoming harder and harder to find as money and obviously people's privacy becomes far more important to them. People don't, in most industries, have the ability to walk up and talk to the world leader in that industry. With Sir Patrick Hogan, they did. A very Irish, very New Zealand ear to him never ceased. In the last couple of years, he started to fail in his health. He spent some time in a wheelchair. His mind was still extremely sharp, and he was still, of all the people I've met in New Zealand racing, probably the most revered and, I would say without doubt, the most respected. Any time people met Sir Patrick for the first time, it was genuinely the same experience you have when you meet Sir Colin Meads, now late Sir Colin Meads, where you hoped you did a lot less of the talking, and you hoped that he wanted to stay and talk to you a little bit longer, so you could have things you would learn about the industry. But some of the traits of Sir Patrick Hogan, I didn't know him as a family man. I didn't spend a lot of time with his family. He had 2 daughters, some grandchildren and some great-grandchildren. But for the New Zealand racing industry, he was Sir Patrick to so many people, and to so many people he was boss or the boss, and they have gone on to become great bosses themselves. So a legacy both on the racetrack and through the veins and blood of racehorses in many countries, but also through the culture, the personality and professionalism of people will be around, Jason, as long as there are horses running around in circles in this part of the world.
What a wonderful set of words you've put together there for us, Mick. Amazing. You talk about his professionalism, you talk about his hard work, you talk about his drive to be better every day. But what about his eye for a horse? Is there such a thing, and did he have it? Presumably he did.
Well, 2 of the countries in the world where, I'm not saying this biasly, where people are respected as judges of horses are Ireland and New Zealand. Obviously, they are green countries. They are small countries, land-based countries for a long time. And the Irish and the New Zealand agents and breeders are world-renowned. There's plenty of other good ones. There's some great ones in Kentucky, in the US. There's obviously some wonderful breeders in Australia. Japan now has an extremely strong breeding industry. But that inherent ability to look at a horse and understand a horse and understand the fluidity of economy of movement, it's no different when you look at a football player. When you look at a football player or a netball player, you can see those who effortlessly move. And a lot of people can see that in a horse, and a lot of the people who can are Irish or New Zealanders. And Sir Patrick had to cross both. Most people start that on the land. They start that because they understand the value of livestock and how they need to be healthy and well-fed and happy to be valuable, because it is the business. And Sir Patrick had that in spades. And when you talk to people like Sir Peter Vella, who runs New Zealand Bloodstock and has dealt with some of the leaders in the world in this, and you hear the reverence they talk about Patrick's eye and knowledge, and of course encyclopedic ability to go back over families and decades. No different to anybody listening to this. If you've been in the industry for 20 years, you have a lot of knowledge about that industry. And if you've been in an industry for 40, 50, 60 years, and you're seeing the changes in those industry, or in Sir Patrick's case, led that industry, it becomes part of your DNA. And for Sir Patrick, he would have looked at, touched, thought about, or studied horses, racehorses, breeding horses, every day of his life, from the time he was 20 to when he closed his eyes yesterday at 83. And that's an incredible amount of knowledge. And the great thing is, even though any passing is sad, so much of that knowledge has been passed on to other people who are now the new guardians of that knowledge and will hopefully take New Zealand racing where it needs to be, because there's a massive export market. But more importantly, it employs around 15,000 people in New Zealand every year. And there are some wonderful horses here. They are part of our life. As much as some people don't care about racing, I fully respect that right. There's lots of people who care about it implicitly. And for a Saturday afternoon in this country in particular, horse racing is predominantly our summer sport. Some people would say it's cricket, but a lot more people go to a race meeting in summer in New Zealand than to any cricket match. So it is part of our life here, and he was a man who made that part of our life, as big or as small as it may be for some people, that much better.
Mick, you mentioned Sir Tristram and Zabeel and the incredible success he had with them, with Melbourne Cup winners and champions right across New Zealand and Australia. But I read your piece yesterday in the Herald, and he was the leading vendor at the Karaka yearling sales for 31 consecutive years. That's just astonishing, isn't it? That'll never be beaten.
Well, no, it will never be beaten. And part of that is due to scale. Obviously, they were dealing with a very big business. And there is a snowball effect to horses. Once you've had a great stallion, because as the stud owner, you have the predominant amount of shares in said stallion, so therefore you breed more mares to that stallion, and therefore you will get higher prices for your progeny. But that still comes from an investment which starts at a very young age. And when you don't have a lot of money, you can buy a stallion you think is going to be great, and it may end up being useless. So you do have that flow-on effect. You need to buy up and keep topping up these families. No different for people to try and make them understand it, to the All Blacks. It's great that the All Blacks won the World Cup in 87 and 2011 and 2015, but it doesn't help you in 2023 and 24. You need to top up again. And with horses, the topping up experience is not easy. They are very, very expensive, and there is a lot of heartache, and things can go very, very wrong with them. And Sir Patrick went to the well with that and went to battle with some very, very intelligent and well-funded sources across the world. So when you do that and you repetitively get it right, it's like any culture of winning. If we go back to the All Blacks, who, yes, may have had a pip last year, but the culture of winning tends to stay with you. And he was a one-man winning culture, because very much it was Sir Patrick's show. Obviously, he is survived by Justine Lady Hogan, but it was his show. Cambridge Stud was his show. It was done his way, and he had employed a great deal of staff. But he made the decisions on what was purchased, mares and stallions. And you could be the smartest man in the world with the best marketing and the best grass. But if you choose the wrong stallions and the wrong mares, you're in a world of trouble. So it all fell on his shoulders, and that, the extrapolation of that through decades of hard work, repeated itself again and again and again. And as you said, 31 consecutive times. And Karaka, which is our major yearling sale, that's where the horses who are 1 year old are sold. Now, that's not an easy thing to do in New Zealand, because there's behemoths like Waikato Stud, and there's been other behemoths before Sir Patrick. So to be the best in a country as renowned for breeding racehorses as New Zealand for 31 years, you say to yourself, can I think of somebody else who, in a career based not just on themselves, but on the ability of their decision-making athletes, for example, a rugby coach, or someone who runs Team New Zealand, or even a government who has to employ members of a cabinet, when you have to rely on your talent to pick other talent, and that talent to be successful, and to do that as the best in your country for 31 years, that would be, I would say, close to unrivaled in virtually any other major captain of industry we've had in this country.
Incredible. Mick, just before you go, I know you've got other commitments. Just had a couple of messages through as you've been on the air asking about the weather and its effect on race meetings around the country. As you've just referenced, it's a summer sport, and a lot of other summer sport at the moment is getting called off. Cricket in Wellington, tennis in Auckland. What about race meetings around the country?
We've got two race meetings in play today. The problem for race meetings is yesterday we had one at Ruakaka, where it was cancelled because of visibility, and that's because of very dense rain, and that can cause mud which throws back up into jockeys' faces and they can't see where they're going. We have a problem in this country that our tracks, some of the tracks are fine. Other tracks need maintenance, and the biggest problem can happen to a track is when it's been relatively dry or weak, Jason, then there's rain. And that's no different to people right now who are home with their families. If you're going outside to play a bit of cricket on the front lawn, and it's been dry all week, and then it rained yesterday, it's slippery. And it's the same for the horses. The horses are going very, very quick. And once tracks get slippery, horses can lose their footing, lose their confidence, and so too can the jockeys. And that's no different to a normal grass track surface. But of course, unlike rugby players, horses don't have spikes they can wear on their shoes to help them out. So yes, we need some track maintenance to make sure there's better turf growth and better roots in our grass to help with that. But to do those things, you need to close tracks, refurbish them, and then race on other tracks in the meantime. And then, of course, you need the weather to play its part, which it hasn't enormously in the last 18 months. So there are issues. They are issues which can only be solved by closing tracks and money and refurbishment. But those questions then come to, well, where do we race? For example, Ellerslie is closed now for a year. Where do we race when it is closed? So it's not an easy thing to solve. And you also say, well, this money we're going to spend on the track today, are we better off spending that money on stakes or animal welfare or anything else? So really complex problems, and obviously they could be solved by money. But we have lots of racetracks in this country which are on exactly the same piece of grass that they were 100 years ago. And that grass gets tired unless you can refurbish those tracks as Ellerslie are doing now. There is light at the end of the tunnel, Jason, but it costs a lot of money. And the problem is with anybody spending money, who anybody would know from their normal business, you say, is this the most important thing or is something else the most important thing? It comes down to this: unless the track is managed well and provided for well, we can't race and therefore we can't make money. So it probably should be our largest industry investment. But there is also logistical issues around that because you need enough tracks functioning at any given time to hold enough race meetings. Hence why they have built synthetic tracks made of a sand composite, one in Christchurch, one in Awapuni in the Central Districts, and one at Cambridge. So therefore people can race on those to help the winter to help the other tracks. But they're not Saturday surfaces. They are surfaces which are more likely to be used for industry meetings during the week. I would predict in the future we may see them used on Saturdays, but the shining light at the end of the tunnel, Jason, is Ellerslie. They'll be racing back there this time next year in what's called a Strat Air track, which has a superior drainage system, and Ellerslie will very much become the utopia of New Zealand racing if done well. I'm sure Sir Patrick Hogan will be looking down and smiling, seeing what they do have in there, because it will be the biggest development in the history of the industry here.
Look, it's just so great to get your expertise. Thanks so much for being so generous with your time, remembering Sir Patrick Hogan and giving us so much great background. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Jason, it's a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the great man.
All the best, mate. Michael Guerin, Mick Guerin, New Zealand Herald's racing editor, on the life and times of the great Sir Patrick Hogan, who passed away yesterday at the age of 83, survived by his wife, Lady Justine Hogan, their two daughters, Erin and Nicola, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Our best to the family and friends of Sir Patrick Hogan.